Okay, so welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at what happens in the very beginning of a construction project. That period right after the contract gets signed, but before you actually start seeing stuff happening on the ground.
Quiet before the storm.
Exactly, exactly. And, we got a bunch of great source material that you all sent in, a chapter specifically about pre-construction and what they call mobilization.
Ah,
So
mobilization.
basically, we're going to figure out what the contractor actually has to do to get ready to, actually build.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, you'd think, once that contract is signed, everybody's just itching to get those bulldozers and excavators in there.
Go. Right, yeah.
But it turns out there's a lot more to it than that. There's a whole lot of stuff happening behind the scenes before any of that heavy machinery even gets close.
Yeah, you got it. It's not as simple as just jumping right in. There's this kind of crucial phase, kind of like a waiting period, right after the contracts are signed.
Right.
And one of the most important things to understand here is this thing called the notice to proceed.
The notice to proceed. Okay.
Yeah, sounds kind of formal, and it is. It's basically an official communication from the owner to the contractor, and it's a big deal. It's
Right.
not just like, hey, yeah, go ahead.
So it's like the real official green light.
Exactly. Like, now you can really officially start. And it's important for a couple of reasons. Like, legally, it gives the contractor the right to actually be on the site and start working.
Oh, okay. So without that, they're technically trespassing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, if they go in there and start digging without that notice, it's a big no-no. And also, it sets the official start date for, the whole project timeline.
Oh, I see. So it's all about accountability and making sure everyone's on the same page, schedule-wise.
Right, right. And for the contractor, it also kind of protects them financially. Think about it.
Mhm.
You don't want them spending a ton of money getting everything set up only to have the project delayed or, like, worst case scenario, even canceled.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see that. So what kind of things would cause the owner to hold off on issuing that notice? What would cause those delays?
Well, there could be a few different things going on. Sometimes, the owner might still be like finalizing some permits. Maybe there's like some easements for the site that are still being worked out.
Easements, right, those legal things for shared access or utility lines and stuff.
Exactly, exactly. Or sometimes, especially for like bigger projects, the financing might not be 100% finalized. Maybe they're still waiting on loan documents, things like that.
So I guess what seems like a standstill from the outside is actually kind of like a flurry of activity behind the scenes, right?
You got it. It's like, yeah, things might look quiet, but there's a whole lot of planning and preparation happening even before that notice to proceed hits the table.
Well, that makes sense. It's always good to have a plan, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of planning, our source material calls this phase the pre-construction phase.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's all about the contractor developing their game plan, their strategy for the entire project.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of the key things that are happening during this pre-construction phase?
Well, first things first, they've got to get their team organized. Before the contract's signed, it's mostly the estimator who's like heavily involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, once the project's a go, the project manager kind of steps up as the main point of contact.
Oh, so there's a changing of the guard in a way.
Yeah, you could say that. And the project manager is responsible for coordinating, pretty much everything. And then there's the superintendent.
Now, the superintendent, isn't that the person who's actually on the site managing the day-to-day construction?
You got it. And while the project manager might be overseeing like multiple projects, the superintendent's usually focused on just this one specific project.
Oh, I see. So they really get to know this project inside and out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And of course, they both have a whole team back at the office supporting them. Estimators, double-checking costs, accountants, handling the money side of things, all that good stuff.
It takes a village, as they say.
It really does. It really does. And then the next big thing they tackle is figuring out the means and methods of construction.
Means and methods. Sounds kind of technical.
It's basically just figuring out the how. Like, the architectural plans and all those drawings tell you what needs to be built, the end result, but the contractor actually gets to decide how they're going to build it.
Oh, that's interesting. So the architect's like the artist, and the contractor's kind of like the engineer figuring out how to actually make it happen.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And this is actually a pretty important part of the process. It's all about making sure that the project can be built efficiently, safely, and, without breaking the bank.
I bet there's a lot of back and forth between the contractor and the architect on that one.
You bet. Our source material actually gives a pretty good example about roof panels.
Oh, tell me about that.
So say the architect wants the roof built with these prefabricated panels.
Hmm.
Maybe they're thinking these panels can be assembled off-site, in a factory and then just brought in and bolted together on the roof. But the contractor might say, hey, for this particular project, it actually makes more sense to build those panels right there on the roof.
I guess they would know better, right? Being the ones actually doing the building.
Exactly. And unless the contract specifically says that the architect's method has to be used, the contractor usually gets to make that call.
Interesting. So experience trumps blueprints, in a way.
Sometimes, yeah. And all those decisions, the means and methods, they feed directly into creating the schedule and the whole budget for the project.
Gotcha. Everything's connected. So once they've got their plan for how to build it, what's next?
Well, then they have to take a good hard look at their budget. They've won the contract, but now they really got to make sure the numbers still work, especially since they start getting actual bids from subcontractors during this time.
Right. So the initial bid was probably based on, like, some estimated costs for parts of the work.
Exactly. Like maybe they budgeted 50 grand for a certain part of the job, figuring that's what the subcontractors would charge. But then they get the actual bids back, and the lowest one's like 54,000.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt.
Yeah, it can definitely throw a wrench in things. So then they got to figure out how to make up that extra 4 grand, maybe by finding cheaper material somewhere else, or maybe by adjusting their own labor costs. It's a bit of a puzzle.
I bet. That's why they call it value engineering, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
And once they've got that adjusted budget, that's what they're going to use to track all the costs for the rest of the project.
Gotcha. So no more guesstimates at this point.
Exactly, yeah. And all of that feeds into what our source calls buying out the job. Basically, it's time to lock in those subcontractors, send out the purchase orders for materials, get all that stuff officially ordered.
So it's basically like going on a massive shopping spree for the project.
Uh-huh, kinda, yeah. But, a very carefully planned and budgeted one. And this whole process, it usually starts during pre-construction and can even continue, into the early stages of the actual construction.
I bet there's a lot of negotiation going on there with the subcontractors and suppliers, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're discussing things like making sure everyone's clear on exactly what work needs to be done, that the subcontractor can actually meet the deadlines, who's responsible for getting materials to the site, where things are going to be stored, all that logistical stuff.
Sounds complicated.
Can be. They also got to figure out things like who's going to be responsible for submitting all the necessary drawings and documents.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the money talk, payment terms, possible discounts, all that fun stuff.
I bet those discounts come in handy, especially with material prices fluctuating so much.
For sure. Like you mentioned that 2net10 thing, that's where the contractor can get.
Yeah.
Like a 2% discount if they pay the invoice within 10 days.
Smart move. Got to keep that cash flowing. So all of this is obviously directly tied to the project schedule, right?
Absolutely. That initial schedule they made during the bidding process, that was kind of just a high-level overview, to get an idea of how long the project would take. But now they're actually able to create a super detailed master schedule, often using special software.
Oh, so they could actually visualize the whole timeline and see how everything fits together.
Exactly, yep. And this master schedule, it's like their Bible for the whole project. They use it to track progress, spot potential delays, really keep everything running smoothly.
Wow, so pre-construction is already a lot to handle. But we're not done yet, are we? There's also this thing about, what was it, pre-construction submittals?
Ah, yes, those. Basically, these are the formal documents and information that the contractor has to give to the owner before construction can actually start. It's all about transparency and making sure everybody's on the same page.
Makes sense. So what kind of documents are we talking about here?
Well, one of the big ones is surety bonds.
Didn't we talk about those way back when we discussed bids?
We did. Bid bonds are submitted with the bid. But now we're talking about payment and performance bonds.
Different types of bonds.
Exactly. And these bonds basically act as a kind of insurance for the owner to guarantee that the contractor is going to pay their subcontractors and suppliers and that they're going to finish the project according to the plans.
So it's like a safety net for the owner in case the contractor, messes things up.
Exactly. And then there's the list of subcontractors. The contractor has to tell the owner who they're planning to hire for all the different parts of the project.
So the owner has some say in who's actually doing the work.
Yeah, typically the owner can object if they have concerns about a particular subcontractor, maybe they have bad reputation or something like that.
So it's kind of like a vetting process to make sure everyone's up to snuff.
You got it. And then there's something called the schedule of values.
Okay, schedule of values, that's a new one.
Basically, it's a detailed breakdown of all the different parts of the project and how much each part is going to cost. And the contractor uses this to, like, bill the owner as the project goes along.
Oh, so it's kind of like a roadmap for payments.
Exactly. It's all about keeping the money flowing smoothly.
Sounds important.
Oh, it definitely is. And then, of course, there's the certificates of insurance, making sure the contractor has enough insurance to cover any potential problems.
Insurance.
Right.
Gotta love it, right? But I guess in construction, with so many risks involved, it's super important.
You bet it is. Builder's risk insurance, for example, covers things like if a fire breaks out on the site or if materials get stolen.
Wow, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, it's definitely something you got to have. And then there's general liability insurance, which protects against, like, if someone gets hurt on the site, like a visitor or something.
Yikes. Yeah, better safe than sorry.
Then you've got property damage insurance, which covers the contractor's own equipment, like if their truck gets damaged or something.
And then on top of all that, there's something called umbrella liability insurance, right?
Yep. That one's basically extra coverage on top of the regular liability insurance. It kicks in if there's like a really big problem, a major accident or something that costs a ton of money.
So basically, it's like a safety net for the really, really bad stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then last but not least, there's workers' compensation insurance.
Oh, yeah. That's for, like, if a worker gets hurt on the job.
You got it. It covers their medical bills, their lost wages, all of that. And it actually costs the contractor more if they have a lot of accidents. So it's in everyone's best interest to keep the job site safe.
For sure. So lots of insurance to think about. But before they can even think about, like, actually starting to build, there's one more crucial piece of the puzzle: the job site layout plan.
Yeah, the layout plan. It's basically like a detailed map of the construction site. It shows where everything's going to be, the trailers, the storage areas, the temporary utilities, everything.
So it's like they're building a little city just for the project.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's really important to do this before they start moving stuff in. Think about it. You don't want materials getting delivered to the wrong spot or workers tripping over stuff because it's all disorganized.
Right. It's all about efficiency and safety. So what are some of the things they have to consider when they're making this layout plan?
Well, first off, they got to figure out where everything's going to go. Where are the trailers going to be? Where are they going to store all the materials? And they got to make sure everything's accessible, no bottlenecks or traffic jams.
Especially when you've got big trucks coming and going all the time.
Exactly. And then there's stuff like where to put the site office so the superintendent can see what's going on and making sure there's enough space for vehicles to turn around safely.
I guess they have to think about the neighbors too, right?
Oh, absolutely. They want to minimize any disruption to like traffic and stuff like that. And of course, safety's got to be a top priority. Where to put the fire extinguishers, the emergency exits, all of that.
So many things to think about. It's like a giant game of Tetris.
Kind of. And they also need to make sure there are clear signs everywhere, for safety information, project details, all that stuff.
Right. Communication is key on a construction site. Okay, so we've got the team, the plan, the budget, the insurance, the layout.
Right.
What else is there?
Permits. They got to get all the necessary construction permits from the city or the county, whoever's in charge.
Right, because you can't just start building willy-nilly.
Nope. And the type of permits you need depends on what you're building. Like, a new house needs different permits than, say, an addition to an existing building.
So what's the process like for getting these permits?
It's kind of like applying for a loan, I guess. You got to fill out a bunch of paperwork, pay a fee, submit all your drawings.
I bet those drawings are super important.
Oh, yeah. They got to show everything.
Yeah.
Site plan, the grading plan, the architectural drawings, the engineering drawings. It's a whole package.
I'm getting tired just thinking about it all.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. And then the city or county, they got to review everything to make sure it meets all the codes and regulations.
So it's kind of like they're double-checking the contractor's work, making sure it's all up to code.
Exactly. And once everything's built, they come back and do a final inspection. And if everything's good, they give you the green light to, like, move in or open for business, whatever the case may be.
Okay, so that's permits. Phew. What else is on the pre-construction checklist?
Well, one last thing. The pre-construction meeting.
What exactly happens at this meeting? Is this like where everyone finally gets together in person?
Exactly. It usually happens just before the contractor starts moving stuff onto the site, and it brings together everybody. The owner, the architect, the contractor, the subcontractors.
So it's like a meet and greet, but for a construction project.
Kind of, yeah. But it's also really important for, like, setting expectations and making sure everyone's on the same page. They talk about stuff like payment procedures, how they're going to handle change orders, timelines for submitting drawings, all that good stuff.
I bet it's also a good chance to iron out any potential problems before they blow up.
You got it. It's all about communication and collaboration. And honestly, for smaller projects, they might not have a big formal meeting. Maybe they just handle it all through phone calls and emails.
Right, but the important thing is that everyone's on the same page. So once all that's done, I guess the pre-construction phase is officially wrapped up.
Pretty much, yeah. The team's ready, the plan's in place, the paperwork's done, and everybody knows what they're doing.
And then they can finally start moving dirt, right?
Well, almost. They still need that all-important notice to proceed from the owner.
Right, that magical piece of paper. Remind us one last time why that notice is so important.
Well, for one thing, it gives the contractor the legal right to actually be on the site and start working. And it also officially starts the clock on the project timeline, which, is tied to the completion date and any potential penalties for delays.
Right, so it's kind of like the starting pistol for the whole project.
Exactly. And even if there's not like a formal written document, it's always a good idea for the contractor to get something in writing from the owner, just to be clear on when that official start date is.
Always good to have a paper trail. So once that notice to proceed arrives, things finally get moving, right? What does that actually look like?
So this is when the mobilization phase kicks in. It's basically when the contractor starts moving all their stuff onto the site, their equipment, their people, their initial materials.
So it's like a well-choreographed invasion.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you could say that. And usually, it's the superintendent who's in charge of all this. They got to get the site office set up, get those temporary utilities hooked up, make sure the site's secure with fences and gates, make it a functional workspace.
And all of that's got to be done according to that job site layout plan we were talking about, right?
Exactly. They've got to follow that plan to a T. And depending on the project, they might also have to start thinking about environmental stuff, like, putting up erosion control measures and things like that.
Right, got to be good stewards of the environment. So basically, it's a lot of hustle and bustle, but it's all organized and purposeful thanks to all that prep work during pre-construction.
Absolutely. It's kind of like when you're planning a big party.
Yeah.
All the real work happens before the guests arrive,
Yeah.
Getting everything ready, making sure everything's in its place, all that stuff. And then when the guests show up, it's showtime.
Love that analogy. So to sum up, there's a ton of important stuff happening before any actual construction takes place, right? Planning, organizing, managing risk, communicating.
You got it. It's a whole complex process, but it's crucial for making sure the project runs smoothly and successfully.
And I think for our listeners, understanding all this really gives you a new appreciation for the complexity of construction projects, right? It's not just about like hammers and nails.
Exactly. It's about teamwork, planning, and managing a ton of moving parts.
Well said. This brings up an interesting question for all of you thinking about out there. We've talked about a lot of different aspects of pre-construction, but what do you think is the single most important factor for a successful project? Is it the team, the budget, the schedule?
I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that one.
So next time you see a construction site, don't just see those cranes and bulldozers. Remember all the invisible work that went into getting it to that point. Until next time, happy building.
See ya.